right? Money, medium exchange, store of value. Well, the store of value element of money is capital preservation. I'm keeping it's my savings account I'm going to hold for 30 years. Currency, checking account I'm going to spend in this month, right? So if you think about it as capital, then or as property, I bought a building. Did you intend to use it to buy coffee tomorrow with? No. You bought a building. Why'd you buy it? Because you wanted to store your capital. You thought it would double in value in 10 years. That's why you bought the building. It's an investment. So when you think of it as property or think of it as capital, then all of those concerns disappear. Now, if you look out at the future, companies, as long as they exist, will issue equity. If Apple and Facebook and Google exist, they're going to issue equity. Equity will not go away. Is it an investment? At a certain price, if you can buy the stock and it has a 22% dividend yield, it's a good investment. If it's too high, it's a bad investment. So there's a natural market clearing price where equity is an investment asset. How about property? People buy real estate, Airbnbs, buildings as an investment. Is it a good investment? If it has a 15% or 10% rent yield and is going up 10% a year in value and it's a good desirable place, then it's a good investment. If the rent pays 2%, after tax and it's in a crappy place and it's not going to value, it's a bad investment. So real estate is a good or bad investment. So property will stay here. The city of New York, city of London or whatever, they will issue bonds. As long as you're municipalities and states and they can issue bonds and they can borrow money, or countries, they will issue bonds. Will you see sovereign debt, municipal debt, state debt? Sure you will. Is it a good investment? Not normally, but credit's not normally a good investment. If it paid 10, 15% interest, and if the currency wasn't collapsing, then it might be. But if it pays 10% interest and the currency is collapsing at 20% a year, it's not a good investment. But will they do it? Yeah. And who will buy it? The governments will buy it from themselves. Central banks will buy their own bonds, institutional investors, regulated banks, regulated corporations, the state power company, they will buy municipal bonds because they're required to by their charter. And so that will circulate. Countries, the United States will issue the dollar. China will issue the CNY. The euro will issue the euro. How long will that go on? Until the nation states collapse. Where does it collapse? Well, half the countries in Africa don't have a currency. They use the CFA, the colonial franc, right? They literally don't have a functioning currency of their own, and El Salvador doesn't have a currency. So those countries will either dollarize or they will use the CNY or they'll use the EU, the euro, or they'll use the CFA. And so where does Bitcoin sit in all of this? It's an asset in a portfolio. It's it's global property. Everybody else doesn't have to fail for Bitcoin to succeed. Right? When we're preaching Bitcoin going to 100 trillion or 200 trillion, that doesn't mean you might not own a building. Is my beachfront property in Palm Beach a bad investment? Well, not necessarily. But there are certain assets that are quote unquote monetized. That is, people buy the asset just as a store of value over and above the utility value. Gold is an example. People that are buying gold as a store of value probably are, 70, 80% of the value of gold is monetary value, and the last part is utility value. One could think that over time, Bitcoin will demonetize gold. There's a scandal in Canada where people, the Chinese were coming. The narrative was the Chinese are coming into Canada, buying up all of our apartments and all of our houses and driving the price of housing up. Well, I mean, maybe also the Canadian government was printing a lot of money, driving up the price of housing too. And maybe corporations were buying up property because that was the best way for them to invest their shareholder capital because they had a lot of money. The problem with that is that the houses, tripled in value, but the wages of the people that want to live in the houses don't triple. And so if you triple the price of the house and if you double the interest rate, then the middle class, working class person can't buy a house. That's an example of monetizing a useful asset to the detriment of the society. What should happen is the people that were buying the houses as a store of value should sell that real estate, buy Bitcoin with it. The price of the houses will become more affordable. And then, 20 something starting their career can buy a house instead of living with their parents. The world is rationalizing when people don't irrationally buy assets in order to avoid losing their money, right? In the extreme, if I tell you all your money is worthless next Monday, you stampede to buy anything you can buy, and you monetize soap, and you monetize toilet paper, and you monetize. You see where I'm going with this? It's like when I panic you monetize anything because you don't want to be holding worthless paper. Better to own food,
Yeah. Where do you get all of your knowledge from? Are there websites that you look at? Are you drawing from personal experience? Is it mentors?
There's a lot of information that circulates on the internet. I mean, so some comes from X Twitter, some comes from YouTube. There's a lot of depth in YouTube. A lot comes from reading. Read The Story of Civilization by Durant, read History of Economic Thought by Murray Rothbard, read, there's infinite books you can download. There's audiobooks, and you can listen to them while you're running, walking, exercising, and the like. I would say it's that combination of podcast, books, informative stuff on the internet, on YouTube, and then the real-time stream coming off of X that I get most of my information from.
Like what podcasts?
Well, like Lex Friedman, he just does these really in-depth interviews. That's a good source. All the Bitcoin podcasts, they will touch on economic history, protocol history, current events. When you hear people talking about Bitcoin is useful as a lens, because if you hear someone from Argentina describing what it means to them, then you get the conditions on the ground in Argentina from a practical economic perspective. It focuses you, right? And when you hear someone talking about what it means in Iran, or you look at what's going on in China, what's going on in Russia, what's going on in Europe, or what's going on in Iceland, or what's going on in Canada or Australia, right? What you've got is crowdsourcing of macroeconomic information. You're not hearing it from the talking heads on cable television. I mean, another source really is, financial news, CNN, Bloomberg, CNBC, all these things. But those conventional news sources, and the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, et cetera, those conventional sources, they tend to filter the information in a conventional fashion. So there'll be a big debate about the unemployment number coming in 0.1% high, and it's at 3.2 or 3.1% this month. But really, 40% of the people don't have a job, and maybe 70% of the people in the world don't have a job that they can sustain them. But the debate will be over the 0.1% on the faux metric, and it doesn't really even matter. Right? Mm-hmm. So the conventional channels are useful because they tell you what conventional thinking is. It's good to know what the conventional traditional institutions are thinking, but you have to go think for yourself. And if you want to understand, for example, what's going on in the crypto economy, like, FIT21 is a bill that passed by an avalanche, a landslide a day ago in the House. It's 484 pages long. You can go click on it and download the PDF and start reading. So I think listening to congressional testimony, which is now available, and Gary Gensler is the chair of the SEC. He taught a class at MIT. The class is online. So I went and I took the class. I was a few years late, but luckily nothing ever dies on the internet. So if you listen to 24 hours of lectures that date back to 2018 by the person that runs the SEC today, and you listen to every word, and then you read every word and every utterance, and then you listen to all the congressional testimony, and then you read all the bills, and then you talk to 100 people in the industry, and then you listen to 1,000 podcasts, and if you have a laser-like focus, then you can synthesize.
Where do you have the time for that? Is this all you do?
And how do you have a laser-like focus? Do you think that you've learned that, or do you think you were just kind of born with that?
This is just um, an exercise in humility. There's 100 things in the world that we could talk about that I might have an opinion on. And there's someone in the world that's passionate about that thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, all 100 things. There's someone that's very passionate about diet or medicine or dentistry or politics in the UK or soccer or the future of women's basketball or, fill in the blank. I mean, there's people that are passionate, but what I've come to conclude is in life, you're lucky if you can gather enough information to form a meaningful opinion on one thing and to be useful in one area, right? If you want to be the domain expert, right? So I feel like laser-like focus, laser is the right metaphor. I have a flashlight, it'll go so far. A laser might go 10 miles. Well, how? You're focusing, you're giving up the ability to project light every other way.
Yeah.
You have to make sacrifices. And so in my case, yeah, I mean, I was the CEO of MicroStrategy, and now I'm the executive chairman. But one reason I stepped down 2 years ago, and I put another guy as the CEO, and I just took the executive chairman role, is that allowed me to spend 100% of my time thinking about digesting what's going on in the Bitcoin crypto economy and figure out what's good for Bitcoin, right? What's good and how best to advocate, adopt, commercialize, evangelize, and even raise money to buy more. And I thought that was a pretty good use of my time. The CEO of a 2,000 person software company has to be concerned with the careers of 2,000 people and 10,000 customers. And there's a lot of other stuff to do. And that's a full-time job. There's a value to focus. You got to focus your energy. You got to focus your effort, partly because you start to make breakthroughs if you can if you can pull all of the source information. If you are pulling the raw information and not getting it synthesized and regurgitated by someone that knows less than you. Sometimes news is like the sound and the fury, signifying nothing, it's told a tale told by an idiot.
Mhm.
Right? It's like people will write a story, but they'll write the exact opposite conclusion of what's really going on because they don't understand the subtleties. Like there's the what the headline says, and then there's the what the person what the government official says, and then what the executive says, and then there's what they meant. But what they meant is never said,
Mhm.
but what's implied. And the only way to understand what's implied is to have enough information about the entire industry and the physics and the dynamics, right? That you can imagine or you can fill in the blanks. Like I know they said that, but that's what they said because they couldn't say anything else. But this is why they did what they did, and this is what they mean. So I think you can say you're a surfer, like, and you're writing stories about surfing. And, the average person goes and they watch the surfer and they see the guy ride the surfboard. But the guy that's the championship surfer that surfed for 30 years, that obsessed over it, goes and watches the same competition and writes the story. They probably write something different.
Mhm.
They're like, why did he do that? Well, he did that because of these following 14 things, the wind and the current, and there's something else, and then where the sun was. And, there's just a lot of dynamics. And if you're not a domain expert, then you can't parse the news feed intelligently. Being a generalist, you know, you sacrifice that. So I think, is it worthwhile to focus? Well, sure it is. I mean, we're talking about solving half the problems in the world, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I think Bitcoin is a solution to half the problems in the world. Every corporation, every government, every individual will benefit. So, yeah, can I afford to focus on Bitcoin? And what do I study? I study Bitcoin, its relationship to the crypto market, the macro economy, every other asset. And then I think about the regulatory environment for corporations and individuals everywhere in the world and how that's evolving. And I try to stay abreast of all that. And that changes by the week. And that's
Yeah.
worthwhile and useful to do. And I would say that somebody else wants to be an expert on something, they should just focus on that.
But in obtaining a laser-like focus, do you think that's something that you were born with, or do you think that that's something that you can learn to have?
I think you can learn it. I think some people are better than others, but I actually think I came to it more through experience and failure. Like, for example, if I go back earlier in my life, I would be very focused for a phase. We'd have a lot of success. And then I would say, okay, I've been successful. Now I'm going to launch 10 other businesses. Yeah, you see this oftentimes, as a dynamic. Someone starts, they have nothing, they're focused, they launch a business, the business gets to a certain size and they declare victory. And then they're like, okay, now I'm going to do this and this and this and this because I'm too good and I'm too smart to be tied down to this one business. And so they stop focusing upon the one thing, they under invest in it. And the thing that they launch begins to decay. And then they launch 10 new things, and like most of them fail
Mhm.
or they whiff. And then they realize that it's juggling too many balls. Right, and then they realize, "Oh, well, I probably should have go back and focus upon the basic thing." And, I lived through that at MicroStrategy. I mean, I eventually realized, that I launched probably a dozen businesses after our initial business intelligence business, and there were some singles and some doubles, and I made some money here and there, but none of them were as successful as the original business. And I realized that I had shifted my focus off of the core business. I came back and I had to focus on that with a vengeance. And it gave me an appreciation that people overestimate what they can accomplish. I guess I would say it's there's this conundrum, which is you have this with a boat, right? You see a boat, you like the boat, you're at a boat show. You're like, can I buy the boat? Yeah, okay. I'm going to stretch, I'm going to buy the boat. And then they underestimate how much it costs to maintain the boat.
Mhm.
Oh my, I have to spend 10% of the purchase price of the boat every year to keep the boat from sinking. Ugh, that's so expensive. So they underestimate the maintenance on the boat and they just think, can I afford the boat? Well, can you afford the boat and pay 10% of the boat's value a year forever? And so that's the second hurdle. And then the third hurdle is, oh, can I enjoy it? Oops, I bought the boat, I'm maintaining the boat, but I'm too busy with everything else to ever use the boat, right? So the hurdle of can I acquire it? Can I maintain it? Will I enjoy it? Right? That's a high hurdle. In business, it's can I create the product? That's not so hard. Can I actually make money selling the product? That's 10x, 100x harder. And then the last hurdle is, can I actually compete successfully against everybody who's going to sell a similar product to me so that I grow faster than they do forever? Can you get into a business, make money, and then can you grow and dominate the market, right? That's 1,000 times harder than can you, here with podcasts, everybody's like, oh, I'm going to launch podcasts. It's not very hard to launch podcasts. The issue is, okay, now can I make money in the podcast and make it a good podcast? Right? That's a lot harder. Okay, now there's other people all the time. Can I actually grow and compete and stay relevant by continually upping my game continually? Well, you can imagine if I tell you, you got to grow your podcast, you got to make money growing your podcast, you got to keep the quality really high, and then you say to me, well, we've been doing it for 3 years and now I think we want to, launch a restaurant and a clothing brand. And we have 3 other things we want to do. We want to get into politics and I would say, I really think you ought to go back to focus. Why do we respect Jimmy Fallon? Why do you respect the Tonight Show or Dave Letterman? Or they showed up every single night, year after year, day after day, and like they didn't like run off to
How do you
launch their own
but how do
whiskey brand.
But how do you know when to pivot? Because it seems like you ended up pivoting somewhat of your business model to a certain degree at the right time. I mean, you could obviously say you should have done it sooner, but how do you know when the right time is to take on more or to make a big change rather than focus?
In this particular case, we have a P&L, the thing we do that we work at is a software business. It's a steady company making money, but it's not going to grow 20, 30, 40% a year. And then we have a treasury, and the treasury was a liability. And so at some point, the world changed. I saw the world in a new fashion, and I realized that I should just turn my treasury into an asset. And so we launched that new
Yeah.
business.
What about for the average entrepreneur?
And
who's
by
focusing
everybody
here.
can do what I just described. It's the equivalent of you guys, you run the podcast, but now you adopt the Bitcoin standard. And
Yeah.
whenever you make money, you invest it in Bitcoin. And then when you go to an investor and they want to invest in the podcast and they want to give you $1 million or $10 million, you say, why don't you give me $50 million? I'm going to invest it in Bitcoin and the podcast. Okay. And at some point, you're still doing the podcast, but Bitcoin's going up 20% a year and you're making $20-30 million a year on the treasury, but you have an endowment and you're going to do your podcast. Like, should you do that? Yeah. It's kind of like saying, when should a company get into the internet or start using mobile phones or start thinking about website or, when should we start posting our stuff on YouTube? Well, when you conclude that YouTube is a good distribution channel or a good technology, you should. Technically, the business didn't pivot. 5 people, 6 people work on the treasury part of the business, 2,000 people work on the other part of the business. What we did is just we fixed a defective investment strategy or a defective treasury strategy by flipping the polarity of that. And if you're asking, for my advice for any entrepreneur, I think my advice to an entrepreneur is you've got a business, think of your business with a P&L and then your balance sheet. If your balance sheet has money, if you have money on the balance sheet and you're investing it in treasury bills, you're generating 3% after tax, but the cost of capital is 12%. So you're losing 9 to 10% of your treasury every year in shareholder value. So you've just jacked into a parasitic system, which is sucking the life out of you. You're being bled to death. And the simple fix there is flip the treasury asset from one that's dilutive 10% a year, the one that's accretive 10% a year. If Bitcoin goes up 24% a year and the cost of capital is 12, right, then you're doubling your treasury every 3 years instead of cutting your treasury in half, right? That's a very simple thing, but that doesn't change how you run the P&L. What you did is you plugged into a technology platform to make you more powerful, to basically preserve or increase your capital. On the P&L, the answer is you plug into a technology platform that makes your product or your service more powerful. So it depends on what your product and service is, but it's simple. If you're a podcaster, right, you think about where are the eyeballs and what is the format. You could create an audio only format or you could create video and audio. And if you create video and audio, then you make the best quality video and audio you can, which means that you get on a plane, you've traveled to the person you want to interview and you set up the cameras. And if the light's bad, fix the light, create the product, right? So you create the right product, then you put it on the right channel. And then, there you focus upon building that viewership. So if you spread yourself too thin and you kind of create a product which is inferior for 10 different channels, then maybe that's not as good as creating an awesome product for 1 or 2 or whatever channels. Obviously, if you want to go on TikTok, you create TikTok content. You take this, you splice it into 15, 30-second TikTok videos and you run it. If you want to run on Instagram, you create real content. On YouTube, it's smart to make sure make it YouTube friendly. Put in the timestamps, put in the description. Some people are stupid. Like they'll post a podcast video and they'll not enable comments, and then they'll put the wrong header in it, and they have a famous name and a famous topic. You wouldn't say we interviewed a dude about the problems in the economy. You would say we interviewed Michael Saylor about Bitcoin because my name trends and the economy
really
trends.
Really smart when it comes. Most people have no idea about YouTube. Just the fact that you said that, you're beyond almost everyone else that we've interviewed.
You're just focusing on creating a great product, and you're asking the question, like you're saying, how do we use AI? Right? How do I use AI to create a better show? When this thing comes out, it'll be in English. You can actually translate it to Spanish and Portuguese, and maybe you capture the Spanish and the Portuguese market if you actually have content in or Korean or Japan. So if I was a podcaster, I'd be thinking hard about the channel and the platform. I'd be thinking hard about creating content that's global. I'd be thinking hard about how I format it in the right form factor that drives the maximum engagement, the maximum likes, right? All of those things. And of course, every year the technology shift, right? Like is Alibaba, is Alibaba or TikTok coming and
Mhm.
going? Is Alibaba coming and going? And then not even just AI, but if you do an AI and it translates garbage, and there's another AI that'll actually create a good Spanish language translation, then obviously find the right one. And I would say probably in this era, you got to allocate 10-20% of your time to just considering the changes in the technology landscape. Can an AI drive your car? Do you sell cars? Can you put AI on your robot? Can you build a robot? Will a robot build will someone create what you're creating?
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a defensive, there's an offensive, and then you're reinventing yourself. But the model I've always had, and I had you know, uh, one of these fossils on my wall, in my office for a while. It's a chambered nautilus, and a chambered nautilus represents a really good model for entrepreneurial growth in business because it's a creature, a mollusk that
Mhm.
lives deep down and under high pressure, and it creates a shell, and then it's growing, and as it's growing it's creating a geometrically larger shell, but it's creating it by turning in on itself. So it's always using its previous work as the foundation for its next work, which is twice as much. So it's like it's the Fibonacci sequence. It's a 1 and a 2 and a 4, or sorry, I'm going to get this wrong. It's not that, but you understand what I'm
I
saying,
do.
which is it's going to spiral out like this. And when you look at the creature, what you say is that is nature's solution to growth under pressure or disciplined growth, because it's always building on its past asset, its past foundation. It's not just, I've got this and I reach over here. This gets snapped off
Mhm.
under pressure, right? Whereas this spiral or chambered nautilus, that actually has integrity under pressure. That doesn't get crushed by the weight. And in your business, if you're taking an asset, like for example, maybe you've got a body of content, good podcast, but you've never been in the Brazilian market, and you figure out how to translate everything to Portuguese. But you know, you try that in the Brazilian market, do you want to go learn Portuguese and then just restart, or work twice as hard interviewing Portuguese people for the Portuguese market and Portuguese, and interviewing English speakers for the English market? And you're like, well, you can see how that becomes too many balls, and you
Right.
drop the balls, and pretty soon you're not using technology to do something 1,000 times cheaper or 1,000 times better. You're just trying to do twice as much. And growth that relies upon you working twice as hard isn't sustainable. You need to find a way to use your assets, but be the first person to a new platform with these assets. If you hypothetically, for example, if you could create an AI that would look at your podcast and automatically generate 27 short reels that run on TikTok and Instagram, that then that pulled the most exciting things said and then dragged people in 37 languages to 37 full podcasts, and that was all done in the 30 minutes after you
Yeah.
finished each podcast by the AI,
Mhm.
that's pretty good. Sometimes I think I'll get on Twitter and I'll say something. I'll do stuff and it'll run 500,000 video views, and I can accomplish more in 5 minutes than if I had a marketing team of 40 people and a $20 million a year budget.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say sometimes if I gave you a $40 million a year budget and 40 or 50 people and 10 lawyers, they would all come together to tell you can't do anything.
Yeah.
You get less done by trying to do things the conventional way than the new way. So I think with entrepreneurs on the P&L, you're just always looking for how you harness platforms. And the two most powerful ideas right now this year: digital money digital intelligence, right? Those are breaking, right? Digital intelligence is AI. It really wasn't commercial 2 years ago. We're like in year one, year two of a 10-year run,
Mhm.
and magical things will happen that were written about in science fiction books 50 years ago. But, the way science works and S curves work is people will talk about doing things for 100 years and they'll never do it. And then the year before it becomes feasible, people will think it isn't, but then it will be. And all of a sudden, you're on an S curve and the entire world changes over the next 10, 20 years. The automobile, the airplane,
Mhm.
etc. And so right now, we're at the beginning of a massive S curve in digital intelligence. And the same is true with money. So if you were trying to do things a conventional way on your balance sheet or a conventional way with your P&L, this is a good time for you to rethink that, because either it will make you 10 times or 100 times more successful, or it'll keep you from being torn apart by the challenger that uses that technology while you're still trying to create studio movies the old-fashioned way with 1,000 unionized workers, and there's a dude with one other person in a computer that spits out the entire series. And
Yeah.
like,
Godzilla is a good example of that.
scary, right?
Yeah.
It's famous that you've lost $6 billion in one day, which I can't even fathom. What were your thoughts like during this day?
It's really stressful and unpleasant because you think about all the other people that you let down.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, it's the shareholder. If you have that change, that's in a public company, right? The public
Mhm.
stock crashes, and you think about the shareholders and the employees that are affected by it and their families, right? And so, I mean, the truth of the matter is, if you have 1 billion and you lose 6 billion, or if you have 100 million and you lose 6 billion, if you have 10 million, you lose, your lifestyle isn't changing one way or the other. At some point, these are just numbers that move back and forth. But the people, like, the people that are the small investors or your employees, their life is changing. So the hardest thing about it is knowing that they're not going to have money they thought they had, or if you have to lay off people, or someone that it's particularly brutal if someone invests in you and they trusted you and you feel like you let them down, or you did let them down, right? So I think that's the emotional toll on that. And you know, I mean, to this day, like, people ask me, what about, should I buy MicroStrategy stock? And I don't want them to. Like I would never recommend anybody to buy it, because you might buy it and it might trade down 10%. You might feel like I let you down, or I don't want you to rely upon me. I'm like, do your own research, make your own decision. It's very risky, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's volatile. And that's why I think even with Bitcoin, I would say if you're not ready to hold it for 10 years, don't hold it for 10 minutes. Like, I would prefer, if you look at me and said, I really need the money in the next 4 years, I would say, definitely don't buy it. I mean, it's reasonable. No one's ever lost money holding it more than 4 years, but really your attitude ought to be, it's a 10-year investment. I'm going to buy it and hold it. And if you don't have that attitude, what you ought to do is not buy it. What you ought to do is spend more time until you get the conviction that you're ready to hold it for 10 years. Just invest money reading and thinking. And otherwise, don't, because I don't want to be the guy that said Bitcoin's good and it trades down 17%, and you tell me that, your family's
Yeah.
bankrupt because of it.
Having so much money invested in pretty variable assets like Bitcoin and your company, what is it to have swings, like $100 million swing, $200 million swing in your net worth, with that happening nearly daily for you?
Yeah.
Do you feel anything outside of that? Like, how can any other life experiences compare to that sort of financial swing?
I'm going to tell you a true story. I'm with a friend of mine in Vegas, and he's a big gambler. Okay. And so he'll go sit at the table and he'll say, give me $50,000 in chips. We sit down at the table. He's got $50,000 in chips. I have $500 in my pocket. I'm like, I don't have any money. It's like, it's okay. I'll spot you here. Take 10,000. We're going to play. And we start playing, and we're playing multi-$1,000 hands. Okay. And the truth is, I would have a hard time just gambling $50,000, going up and down $10,000. He has no problem at all. But I have no problem at all having $1 billion bet and having it trade down $300 million, or a $15 billion bet and having it trade down $3 billion doesn't bother me in the least. But I would not gamble $30,000 in chips on a blackjack table. That would just drive me bananas. So the truth is, you could imagine that it would bother me. It doesn't. And here's why. It's because the gambling table, I feel like the odds are stacked against me and the house is going to win. And it bothers me that I'm playing a game that's stacked against me. But with Bitcoin, I feel like the odds are way in my favor. And, at some point, 18 months ago, we had $2.5 billion of Bitcoin, and we had $2.5 billion market cap or something like that. And everybody else is freaking out. I'm not freaking out. Bitcoin traded from 66,000 to 16,000. People said, "What are you going to do?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to wait for it to go back up again." Right? It's been oversold. It's going up. My view is it's going up forever. If you owned Central Park in Manhattan, for hundreds of years, and someone said, "Well, there's a war. I hear that the price of real estate in Manhattan just dropped 30 or 40%. What are you going to do?" I'm here forever, right? I'm not selling. I don't need to sell. I'm just waiting for the world to rationalize. So it's not really stressful. In fact, there's a very a subtle point to be made here. MicroStrategy's attribute is that it's volatile. Like, the reason that we're able to raise billions of dollars of capital is because we're more volatile than Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is more volatile than the S&P index. So that's actually an attribute. It makes the options valuable. That's why there's $30 billion or more of options trading in the options market, because if there was no volatility, the options are worthless. And if the options are worthless, we can't raise money. So we can go to the market and raise $1 billion and pay 60 basis points or 70 basis points. I can borrow money for 0.5%. You probably can't borrow $1 billion for 0.5% interest. I can borrow it for 0.5% interest for 6 years. Okay. And so you're going to say to me, "Are you bothered by the swings?" No, I'm aware that because of the volatility, I'm able to sell a convertible bond that's got a 7-year duration or a 7-year duration and pay 80 basis points interest. That's no recourse, unsecured, right? And if I didn't have the volatility, if it went away, I would pay 10% interest. And by the way, I'd have to pay 10% interest, and I would only be able to borrow about 1/4 as much money. You have to embrace the volatility in the same way that you get out in the ocean and you put up the sail and the ocean kind of does this to you, and this is your cabin. And you're like, "Are you bothered by the motion?" And I'm like, "Well, the alternative is get out and swim."
Yeah.
But it's still not good. The truth is, I'm not going anywhere if I don't accept the volatility. And there's a difference between volatility. Like, MicroStrategy had $500 million of cash it didn't need and no volatility 4 years ago. Today, MicroStrategy has $14 or $15 billion of Bitcoin, $3 billion or $3.5 billion in debt. So it's like plus $12, $13 billion of assets it doesn't need. What difference does it make whether the amount trades up $1 billion a day or down a day? It's $1 billion. When Bernard Arnault goes from being worth, 180 billion to 160 billion to 120 billion to 200 billion, do you think it bothers him? Does it change his behavior? The reason he's successful is laser-like focus on the luxury business. Right? It's like that's just an artifact of it. And we can make that volatility go away. You know how we do that? We just give away all the money. Like Bernard Arnault could just give away all the stock and he wouldn't have any volatility. And MicroStrategy, if we gave away the $15 billion, we wouldn't have any volatility. But volatility is vitality. It's life, right? So you're better off. You do bring up an important point, which is conventional wisdom in corporations is volatility is bad and capital is toxic. So most corporations in the world, what they do is they say we have to give the capital back to the shareholders because holding it as debt is obviously destroying shareholder value, right? You notice the
Mhm.
big buyback at Apple, the big buyback at Facebook, the
Yeah.
buyback at Google, the buybacks, the capital is toxic. It's like, I want to get rid of it. Why is money a bad thing? Think about it for a second. Because you've got to invest in the wrong asset. You've got the wrong kind of money. You're holding 100 billion of pesos, it's going to zero. If you're holding 100 billion of Bitcoin, it's doubling in 3 years, right? So the capital is toxic. So they decapitalize, which is pernicious. And the other thing is volatility is toxic. And so they want to get rid of volatility. Microsoft sells contracts 3 years in advance, like a 3-year enterprise
Mhm.
agreement. Like, I just want long-term rental contracts. Like, I want you to agree to buy the same thing from me for the next 3 years with the CPI escalator, and that way there's no uncertainty. I mean, the issue is if there's no volatility on the P&L, there's no volatility on the balance sheet, and then if I want to evaluate the stock, I can look at it once a year, put a price on it, buy, and snooze on you for the next 364 days, right? I mean, what's going to happen? Nothing. Well, if nothing happens, the options are worthless. You're not going to trade the options. That means you're not going to trade the underlying equity. That means the stock options for the employees become worthless. So how can you succeed, if you have no capital and you have no volatility, right? And the
Mhm.
answer is you're just going to have to work yourself to death. If you can't grow your revenues 15% a year, then you're going to fail. And so in that case, that explains why most corporations have a life expectancy of 10 years. They're all dying in 10 to 15 years because they have toxic capital and they have dysfunctional financial strategies. And so
Yeah.
these things that other people want to run away from, I think you should be running toward those things.
What's your biggest insecurity?
That's an interesting question. I suppose my biggest insecurity is I don't want to let people down. Like at some point, if more and more people trust you or put their faith in you, or you feel more responsible for them, I've got employees, 2,000 of them. I hate the idea of letting them down. I've got shareholders, now lots.
Mhm.
I've got bondholders, and I've got stakeholders. So now we become important to them. And then you've got the entire Bitcoin community. And Bitcoin's a team. It's a global team. I travel everywhere in the world. I get off on a flight line, and the guy that's actually refueling the aircraft is like going like, "Hey, I own Bitcoin. I bought some for my kid." You go through a bar, and the guy behind the bar knows you, or the waiter, or the waitress, or all these people. And what this means to them is there a chance at economic sovereignty and social and security, and it's given them hope. So if you're lucky enough, right? If you're lucky enough to have employees, have investors, and have people that listen to you, then the thing you should fear is letting them down, right? And so I think it becomes a greater responsibility as more people take you seriously in life.
The last question that I have is what's something that nobody knows about you that you feel like they should know?
Another very interesting question. A lot of people know a lot about me. I've done a
Mhm.
few podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think about something that I haven't really spoken about much. I think one thing is I have a profound appreciation for nature and natural law and natural beauty. And I think a lot of the most beautiful things in life and the most important wisdom is derived from a close study of nature. And a lot of people think that, because they see me in technology and in commercial environments, that I'm a technologist. But I actually think a lot of the inspiration and the best inspiration comes from nature. And I think that we would all do well to be grounded in it to the extent that we can be.
Cool. Anything else?
The only other thing is we looked up photos of you and it looked like you used to be bigger. Did you shed some weight?
Yeah.
Like that looked pretty impressive.
At one point, yeah, I was probably 30 pounds heavier. And what happened is I started appreciating, I mean, the things that you can learn today if you study paleo diets, lean proteins, steak, salad, vegetables, stay away from too much starch, too much sugar, too much alcohol, right? If you want to be 30 pounds heavier, drink sugar water, drink alcohol, drink starch, eat a lot of pizza, potatoes, pancakes, rice, etc. Eat processed food, eat fast food. All of those things take their toll. But what's the secret to life? I think someone said it the other day. They said, get plenty of sleep, um, put good nutrients in your body, eat good food, nutritional food, eat food that would rot. It's not,
Mhm.
you can't leave it out for 3 days and still eat it, right? So eat organic food. The closer to organic, the better. And don't poison yourself, right? With toxins. There's a lot of different types of toxins, but just don't put them in your body, right? And then get exercise, get routine exercise. So I think that that helped a bit. That I would recommend that to anybody. And I would say, coming back to natural principles, one thing I think about a lot is this something that my great 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 grandfather would have done 100,000 years ago? Because the human genome, right, and humanity has evolved over millions and millions of years. And if you think about all those generations, how did you evolve and what did you adapt to? There are certain things that we do today that they wouldn't have done 100,000 years ago. And a lot of times those things are pernicious. Drinking a carton of orange juice,
Yeah.
impossible to do 100,000 years ago.
Sugar in that. Yeah.
But, you give yourself diabetes or the like if you just pound that stuff too much. So I think, just looking at diet, exercise, nutrition is useful. I think 30 years ago, there were some pernicious ideas. Like, it used to be every alpha male business leader wants to brag about how little sleep they get. Oh, I get by on 3 hours sleep. Oh, I get by, it's like when the competition is to brag about how little sleep you can get. It's just, here's an unhealthy habit and I do it. And of course, a lot of people, I think, lied about it.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of times people say stuff in public, in an interview. What's your secret? Well, I don't need that much sleep. I sleep 3 hours. And then, what an awful disservice you do to the humanity, because,
Yeah.
you find a lot of people die because they didn't sleep enough. And then, when I grew up, I looked at all the athletes and the bodybuilders, and I was like, well, I don't look like that guy. And I thought I just wasn't trying hard enough. And then at one point I realized they're all taking steroids or performance
Yeah.
enhancing drugs. And, it was only in the modern era, when information comes out on YouTube, guys like More Plates, More Dates. Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
We've had him on the
Let me tell
show.
you what
Yeah.
steroids this
Yeah. He
actor
came
took.
on the podcast.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
I started listening to him and my mind is blown. And I realized, like, everything I believed was not, it's like, oh, how'd you bulk up for this movie role? Oh, yeah, I ate a lot of chicken. No, you didn't
Yeah.
eat a
Worked
lot
out
of,
twice a day. Yeah.
I ate a lot of chicken and I had a trainer.
Yeah.
And that's just pernicious, like, untruth. So when you start to actually understand how people achieve what they achieve, and you're like, well, that might work, but that might also give me cancer at age 27. And maybe I don't want that. I think it helps you make rational decisions about what to eat, how to live, right? How much to sleep. And there's, like, even with exercise, it's like, yeah, you can do the Hollywood, specialty exercises, but, to a great degree, simply low impact aerobic activity that's not going to destroy your joints is a pretty good thing. And engaging in full contact combat sports,
Mhm.
might not be the best path, over the long run. So I don't know. I think I get a lot of wisdom, or gleaned a lot of wisdom about health, just from all sorts of unfiltered, unbiased internet sources.
That's
That's useful.
awesome. Cool.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for being so generous
I know.
with your time. I mean,
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Is there anything else that that you feel like we didn't touch on that you want to talk about?
Well,
Just
I
wanna
mean, I
make
guess
sure.
I would end just by saying, my personal opinions are all my own. Form your own opinions. My primary professional opinion is Bitcoin's good, and if you don't know that Bitcoin is good, don't go buy Bitcoin because I said it's good. What you want to do is go learn about Bitcoin. I think that you will spend 40,000 hours of your life, maybe 60,000 hours of your life trying to make money. It is worthwhile to spend 100 hours of your life figuring out how to keep it and figuring out what it is and thinking about that. So most people won't. Most people will. They'll just go do something because their friend told them to do it. But if you do it for a shallow reason, you'll probably panic and sell it or do the wrong thing or get confused by another shallow reason. So I think that the best investment anybody can make is go spend 100 hours, studying Bitcoin, then study economics, then study the, history of money, and then think for yourself and think really, really hard about risk and the like. And some resources to do that, or if you go to hope.com, HOPE, just remember Bitcoin is hope. It's a website we run. It's got a ton of Bitcoin resources, courses, books, materials, interviews, et cetera, that you can get to, and other people that are experts. You can go trace down that rabbit hole and look at them. So that's one place to go. I think if people are interested in my Bitcoin musings, follow me on X Twitter. I'm Saylor, SAYLOR. And otherwise, I wish everybody the best.
Cool. Yeah, we'll link to everything down below in the description, so it'll be super easy, including hope.com.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Perfect.
thank you
Thanks
so much.
Till next time.
You have 100 billionaires in a room. One middle-class dude with a $300 gun walks in. Who's the most powerful person in the room? The number that matters if you want to either get wealthy or stay wealthy is the rate of expansion of the currency supply. And so if you're not actually investing, growing your cash flow, growing your assets, you're getting poorer. Bitcoin is a system so diffuse that no one entity or person is systemically important or influential. And everybody shares this common economic protocol in a fair, equitable, transparent, unstoppable, immutable fashion.
It's famous that you've lost $6 billion in one day. What were your thoughts like during this day? Michael Saylor, thank you so much for coming on the Iced Coffee Hour. This is an absolute honor. We really appreciate it.
Jack Graham,
Yeah.
thanks for having me.
Your house, by the way, is gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we've seen plenty of your podcasts. We've been absolutely just binging all of these different shows you've been on. The Lex Friedman one got like 10 million views. Why do you think people care so much about what you have to say?
There's like 450 million people in the world that have crypto, some kind of crypto asset. Bitcoin is spreading virally. There's hundreds of millions of people that own Bitcoin. This is an idea whose time has come, and it's a fundamental idea. We have developed a technology that empowers humanity and empowers the individual. It provides property rights to 8 billion people. It provides freedom, economic sovereignty, and the promise of sovereignty and dignity of the individual to 8 billion people. And we do it with cryptography, semiconductors, and the internet. So it punches all the buttons, right? It's about money. And those are all interesting topics for people.
Why should people listen to what you have to say?
I think that everybody ought to do their own research and listen to a lot of different points of view. So I'm certainly not the only voice. My particular voice is that with the background of an engineer. I went to MIT and I studied aeronautical engineering and spaceship design. So I have an engineering background. I have a long, enthusiastic history as a tech investor. As an early investor in Amazon and Apple and Google and Facebook. I wrote a book about the impact of technology, especially mobile technology, on civilization and on the economy. That's based upon my studies at MIT. I studied science, technology, and society, and the history of science is another one of my degrees. And then when I saw the advent of the mobile phone, it became clear to me that mobile phones were going to dematerialize cameras and tape recording and entertainment and relationships and money and commerce and retail storefronts and newspapers and books. And when I thought about the dematerialization of all that, I thought the world's going to change. There are going to be these trillion-dollar companies like there are today, Apple and Amazon, Google, Microsoft. I thought that's going to make a difference. I wrote that book back in 2010, published it in 2012. I rode that mobile wave for about a decade. And I did that while I was running a company I created. I created a company when I was 24 called MicroStrategy. In 1998, we came public, and MicroStrategy is MSTR. It's still in business, and I was the CEO for 30 something years. Now I'm the executive chairman. So I spent a career running a public company. Our company sells enterprise software to banks and governments and airlines and large corporations and most of the retailers in the world. So before I discovered Bitcoin, I had an engineering background, a tech investor background. I was a bit of a academic in the history of science, and I had a background in the real world running a software company that was multinational, and I had a background as a public company CEO. And along the way, I picked up lots of bruises as a tech entrepreneur. I picked up lots of wisdom, learning what it's like to do business everywhere in the world. And along comes 2020 and the pandemic crisis, and there's COVID, and there was lockdowns, and then the interest rates went to zero, and there was financial hysteria, and the world was turned upside down and split in half. All of our office cultures, they all got thrown out the window, and we all went to remote work, and we did it like overnight. All of our prejudices and biases, well, we think we should do it this way, they got thrown out the window, and maybe we have to do it a different way. All of our thoughts about money and banking, it's like, okay, here's your money in the bank. It earns 0% interest. Well, what am I going to do? And by the way, we're inflating the currency, and eventually everything's going to cost twice as much. Houses are going to go up in price, and yet your money's going to earn zero. That causes people to open their mind to new ideas. So in my case, I approached this existential risk in 2020, running a publicly traded company, and we happened to have two things. We had about 500 million in cash, earning 0% interest, and we had a $500 million software business generating about 75 million in cash flow. And our stock was a bit more than $1 billion in value. So the marketplace put 1x multiple on our business and 1x multiple on the cash. And I looked at it. My first concern was, will the company survive the crisis? In March, April, May of 2020, we were all worried about, our lives, our family, our businesses, our business model. And once I realized that wasn't going away, my second thought was, how is it possible that every Main Street business is having the worst year of their life? Every restaurant, every bar, every gym, every yoga salon, everyone, that shows up to work, not only are they not working, they're not allowed to work. And if you open up your gym, people are getting arrested for opening up a gym to get healthy. So on one side, you have this crisis. Half the people in the world or half the businesses are having the worst year of their life. And then in the summer of 2020, all the Wall Street firms had the best year of their life. All the stocks doubled. All the real estate assets went through the roof. When we dropped the interest rate to zero, real estate property values double. All of a sudden, all the big tech companies are shooting through the sky, and S&P is shooting through the sky. And I just saw this paradox. How is it possible that one part of society thinks everything's great, and another part of society thinks this is the most awful thing? So we were worried a little bit about that, but really we thought, $500 million is going to be worth $500 million in 4 years, except that you're going to need $1 billion to buy the same amount of stuff as you could buy with $500 million today. So we're destroying shareholder value to sit in our position. The market doesn't care about us. And on the other hand, we don't own anything that's benefiting from all this inflation and from these low interest rates. So we started looking around, and in that year my mind opened and I embraced a lot of new ideas. I embraced the idea of podcasting. I'd
Mhm.
never done any podcasts until 2020. I embraced the idea of Zoom. I would have fired you in February if you wanted to do remote work, but by the end of March it was mandatory. So
Yeah.
it's like 10 years or 20 years of innovation or evolution, all coming in a week or 2 weeks. Then I thought, well, what am I going to do with this money? I either got to give it back to the shareholders, and decapitalize. And if I decapitalize, I thought that's a fast death, right? Our company was looking at a fast death, a slow death, or uh, do something new. And I wasn't interested in the fast death. The slow death didn't have a lot of appeal. Just get chipped away at by big tech companies. And so it's kind of a desperate moment, a moment of truth where you have to make a decision and take a risk. And so we looked around and we said, well, what do we need right now? Well, we need a hard asset that is scarce, that people all want in the world, and we need to get on top of the next big tech trend. Like, is it digital relationships? Is it digital books? Is it digital photographs? Well, it's too late to jump on top of Apple, Amazon, and Google and Facebook. You had to hit them and invest in them in 2010,
Mhm.
2012. I said, what's the next big thing? I thought, what about Facebook for money? What if someone actually invented a bank for that a billion people, or in this case, 8 billion people needed, that ran on the internet, that actually had an asset which no government could debase, which every wealthy investor wants, which you could move at the speed of light, that you could program into an iPhone. What is this? Digital gold, digital capital, digital property. What if the next wave is the digital transformation of money, of property, of energy, of all these ideas? They weren't transformed in the first internet wave. And I looked around, I thought, well, that feels like crypto gold to me. And so what if I could create something that was better than gold? It had none of the defects of gold, and it offered the promise of sound money to 8 billion people. And then I could combine that with a digital network like Google, like Android, or like iOS, or like the internet. That struck me as being the next big idea. And so MicroStrategy became the first public company to buy Bitcoin. And we bought $250 million of Bitcoin in August of 2020. And no one had ever made such a large commitment to this scary, new, crazy crypto
Were
idea.
you worried about volatility at the time, that you could make that investment and have it drop by 80-90% in a year?
Yeah, I was worried about volatility, and the way that we dealt with that was we had 500 million in capital. I wasn't worried that it would drop and we would panic sell it. I was worried that it would drop and our shareholders would have a big issue with it and we might get sued. Right?
Yeah.
And so the way we dealt with it was we announced that we were going to do a $250 million stock buyback at a premium. We call it Dutch auction. And we paired it with a $250 million Bitcoin purchase. And we allowed all of our shareholders to get out. Like, if you didn't buy into the Bitcoin strategy, you could tender your shares back to the company at a premium.
Mhm.
That rotated our shareholder base, and we didn't have neutral or indifferent shareholders. We had all pro Bitcoin shareholders. And that changed the dynamic of the company. It turned out that that Dutch auction resulted in only about $60 million of shares being tendered. So we had 175 million left at the end of the Dutch auction period 20 days later.
Yeah.
And we bought another 175 million of Bitcoin. And then we had 425. So at this point, no one in the world, I think the largest public company might have had $1 or $2 million of Bitcoin before that. And we come over the top with 425 million. And we declared to the world that we thought this was going to be our primary treasury reserve asset, right? This is the way we're going to run our treasury. And that was a brand new idea. There's 43,000 public companies, and we were the first one to say, let's not put your capital in bonds or cash or just give it away. Let's invest the capital in this new liquid asset, this crypto asset called Bitcoin. When we did that, the stock doubled, and we raised another $650 million.
Mhm.
And then the stock went up again, and we raised $1 billion. And we raised $1 billion about 6 months after this initiative in a convertible debt offering at 0% interest. So we borrowed $1 billion at 0% interest for about 6 years, I think.
Yeah.
And we went to buy Bitcoin with it. So at that point, we had said, not only do we think we're going to invest our free cash in Bitcoin, we're going to go ahead and we're going to borrow money to buy Bitcoin. And while we were doing it, other public companies like Square and then Tesla started buying Bitcoin. And then all these Bitcoin miners came public. And so from 2020 to 2024, that was the crazy years of uncertainty. People weren't sure, will Bitcoin be banned? Will it be copied? Will it be hacked? Is it a long-term thing? The skeptics thought, well, maybe, some people, the deniers said, it's just tulip bulbs. Other people, skeptics said, oh yeah, it's really good. It's better than gold, but it's too good to be true. And so the government's going to take it away from you. And at one point, China banned Bitcoin mining, and that created a crisis. And then they banned Bitcoin trading, and that created a crisis. So a lot of uncertainty there. But our belief was Bitcoin is the solution to 8 billion people's problem. It's the solution to 300 million companies' problem. It's the innovation, the biggest innovation in money or property rights in the history of the human race. It's like fire or electricity, right? It's this new monetary protocol which is going to elevate humanity to new levels. So we became obviously very big advocates. We raised $500 million in a senior debt issue to buy more Bitcoin. Then we sold $1 billion of equity to buy Bitcoin. Then we sold another, then we borrowed money against Bitcoin to buy Bitcoin. Then we issued more equity to buy Bitcoin. If you fast forward through the 4 years, as of today, since we started, we've invested $7.5 billion in Bitcoin, which is worth any given day 14 to 15 billion. The market cap of the company went from 1 billion to 30. The enterprise value of the company went from 600 million to more than 30. So, and the stock 10x. So during that time period, the company stock outperformed just about every stock on the S&P index. It outperformed NVIDIA and Tesla and Amazon and Apple and Google and Facebook. It outperformed Bitcoin itself. And it's not very often that you 10x a stock, 20x a market cap, 40x the enterprise value in 44 months.
Right.
So we took a particular position, which is Bitcoin is a good strategy. It's good for the world, and we're not going to be shaken. And while that was happening, obviously Bitcoin, when we bought it at 11,800, it crashed down into the 9,000. So we took like a $40 million hit in the first week or 2 weeks. So it was very stressful, losing 40 million of 250 million, right? It's a big thing, but we doubled down, and then Bitcoin rallied up, and it eventually went through the all-time highs and rallied to 66,000, then crashed down in the 40s, then rallied to the 66 again. And then this brutal crypto winter went from 66 all the way down to 16,000. Brutal. And then it rallied up. And so it is today where it is, and everybody's got their own Bitcoin journey, but MicroStrategy's Bitcoin journey is, we started out of desperation. It was like, do this or maybe just shutter the company. We went from, desperate defensive to opportunistic. Hey, someone wants to give us $1.6 billion for nearly free for 6 years. If I offered you $1.6 billion for free for the next 6 years to invest in anything you wanted, would you take it?
Absolutely. We asked Dave Ramsey the exact same question. He said no, he wouldn't take it.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
And you must not believe in anything, right? I mean, if you're in business and someone's offering you, in essence, free money to invest in your business for the next 6 years and you don't want it, well, what it really means is you've run out of ideas. You don't know what to do with the capital. But, we went from the first step to opportunistic, and then it became strategic. And we realized we are a Bitcoin development company. Our job is to issue securities and to engage in technology projects and advocacy and education in order to spread the virtues of Bitcoin and the opportunities of Bitcoin to the world.
How were you able to develop an eye to spot innovation like that before the general public? Were you always like this, like growing up as a kid, to be able to spot trends?
But before we get into that, guys, I have learned so much about building businesses and entrepreneurship from the business experts we've had on this show. But if you're like me and you're always hungry for more, that's where I turn to our sponsor, Masterclass.
With Masterclass, you could learn from the best to become your best. In fact, Masterclass is the only streaming platform where you could learn and grow with over 200 of the world's best. For just $10 a month, an annual membership to Masterclass gets you unlimited access to every single instructor. Plus, you could access Masterclass on your phone, smart TV, computer, or even an audio mode. Like you could learn to build a business with Mark Cuban, get world-class leadership training from Navy SEAL veteran Jocko Willink, or even take your cooking to the next level with Gordon Ramsay.
Matter of fact, James Clear, who wrote one of my favorite books of all time, Atomic Habits, has a class that teaches you how to build habits that stick. He actually taught me one of my favorite ideas I've ever heard, which is that we do not rise to the level of our goals, but we actually fall to the level of our systems. So he really emphasizes how important it is to have strong systems in place.
And the classes really make a difference. 88% of their members say that Masterclass has had a positive impact on their lives. And best of all, right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/iced. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/iced. Masterclass.com/iced. The link down below in the description.
Thank you so much, Masterclass, for sponsoring this episode, and back to the podcast.
How were you able to develop an eye to spot innovation like that before the general public? Were you always like this, like growing up as a kid, to be able to spot trends?
I was a science fiction fanatic by the time I was in third grade. Like, I think my parents, they hacked me when I was in first grade. I had this comic book addiction, and they offered me a dime for every real book I read in some reading competition. And comic books cost 25 cents. And I calculated if I read 2.5 books, I could get a comic book. And so I read like 60, 70 books in the summer. And I'd be like reading one a day, and I got into science fiction. And I discovered all the great authors, Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke. Got very interested in that. It led me to a bit of fantasy. I'm the kind of guy I played board games, simulation games. Before we had computers to simulate them on, we had to use dice, and then I played Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay,
and then
cool.
It got me into fantasy, and all of that's about imagination. And one of the more famous books is Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Heinlein. And in the book, the hero discovers a spacesuit, fixes it up, it's broken, barking at the sky, a spaceship lands, he gets picked up, he gallivants across the universe, saves humanity from the bug-eyed monsters, comes back. And as his reward, he gets a full tuition scholarship to MIT. And I guess it's stuck in my mind, that if you're the upwardly mobile alpha male, tech forward thinker, maybe you want to go to MIT. So I went to MIT to study spaceship design, and I was going to be an astronaut and a spaceship designer. And that brought me in touch with some just extraordinary individuals, extraordinary professors, extraordinary students. Like, every one of my fraternity brothers was like an Eagle Scout, right? Like, okay, welcome. Like, everybody's a valedictorian, everybody's an Eagle Scout, and they're all brilliant. And what they do for fun, they design space equipment, or they hack the phone system, or the like. And while I was there studying aerospace engineering, I stumbled on the history of science. And the history of science is all about how did we discover immunology? How did we discover that the Earth, revolves around the sun? Like, how do we get through the Copernican revolution? What's the significance of optics? Why do we stop bleeding people to death? What's the significance of nuclear power? What's the significance of Maxwell's equations, or Newtonian physics, or relativity? And, what did Madame Curie do for us? And how does the society react when you introduce a new technology, whether it's a railroad or an internal combustion engine or an airplane? And so if you look at the history of the world through a technology lens, right, then you start to see things differently. So when I came out of MIT, I had the science fiction background, I had the fantasy background, I had the history of, I always loved history in general, but then the history of science really opened up my eyes to paradigm shifts. I mean, one of the most basic principles of science is the paradigm shift. Dr. Harvey is the guy that discovered that the heart beats blood out through the arteries. It circulates back through the veins. For 10,000 years, no doctor knew what the heart did, and they didn't actually accept circulation. Harvey discovers it, and everybody in the medical profession rejects it. Like, no, we don't believe you. Now, despite the fact they could probably determine this with some experiments, but they don't believe him. And Harvey says, no physician over the age of 40 will ever believe me, ever. Right. And then I think Max Planck had a quote. He goes, science advances one death at a time. And Thomas Kuhn says in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, when you come up with a new paradigm shift, whether it's, the Copernican revolution, right? The universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. Your diseases aren't caused by spirits and demons, but rather by little germs and, in the blood. Or relativity that Einstein put forward, in the paradigm shift of quantum physics, which Einstein rejected, or quantum uncertainty. Kuhn says these paradigm shifts take place only after the old guard dies or in a war. There are only two ways you get people to turn the world upside down and see a new idea. They either have to see the old guard die. We're seeing this in crypto right now. I mean, I go around and I'll meet people and they'll say, yeah, my son told me I needed to talk to you. It's like the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, the teenagers, they all know. The 50-somethings, 60-somethings, 70-somethings, if they're hearing it from their kids. So this is a generational thing up. And I think, so I was fortunate because my advantage was I kind of had the academic grounding. I had the passion. I was always very interested in how do we invent new things with technology. I grew up in a coming of age where, there were 3 channels of broadcast television, and then in rapid succession, you got to where we are today. So, obviously some people are a little bit more, what is the word?
Open-minded?
They've got more of a inclination, an intellectual inclination to appreciate that than others. So I always had a bias toward it. And I just had some really good formative experiences and opportunities in order to feed that inclination.
I'm curious, who were some of your biggest influences or like inspirations when you were younger that kind of like, I don't know, maybe made you think the way that you think? And as you elevate the financial ladder and you make this crazy decision, or controversial, I should say, to put hundreds of millions of dollars into Bitcoin to turn it into billions of dollars, now that you have all of that money, who do you look to now for inspiration? How's that's changed?
The great science fiction writers, were inspirations. Heinlein in particular, not only is he a good science fiction writer and he tells a good story, but he's also libertarian. He's also a sound money advocate. So his writings are laced with conservative economics, practical observations about politics. Inspirational stories of improving humanity with technology. I think that's a very important formative experience. Reagan, Thatcher, they were very successful politicians in their day. They both preached limited government, right? Power to the people. Ayn Rand and her books, Atlas Shrugged, The Fountainhead, very inspirational. Science historians, and the historians, Alvin Toffler, the people who are Megatrends, Future Shock, all those books that were, how is the world going to turn upside down? I thought that was very interesting, inspirational. And I think, Arthur C. Clarke's got a very famous statement. I put it on the back cover of my IPO prospectus in 1998 when the company came public. That's how important the phrase was. And his phrase was, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? And that was the mantra of the great science fiction writers, where it blends with fantasy. It's like, what's a magic mirror? Well, I look in the mirror and I talk, and then somebody talks back. Well, now you take, an iPad or you take an Apple computer and you look at it and you Zoom to someone in Singapore and you talk and they talk back. And that's getting pretty magical. But then at the point where they take your photo and they plug you into an AI and they bring you to life and they put you into cyberspace, and I'm talking to an AI that's
Mhm.
talking back to me with your gestures. Am I talking to a demon, a
Hmm.
witch, a demigod, a person? Where did the science stop? Where did the fantasy begin? And that inspired me to start MicroStrategy. And our idea was intelligence everywhere. Let's make everybody super intelligent. Like, think about what some of these AIs can do today. You can basically ask the thing to scan the entire body of human writing.
Mhm.
Give me a Shakespearean sonnet, but and the style of Eminem, and in 100 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds, it comes
You
back.
know what? Jack did that last night.
Yeah.
We said to ChatGPT, if we were to interview Michael Saylor, what should our format be? And my gosh, it gave us an outline that we would have probably spent an hour thinking of ourselves, and it did it
I
in.
would say probably more than an hour. It was pretty. I mean, we already
was-
had an outline,
we
but
already
we're
had
like,
an
I'm
outline,
just
yeah.
kind of curious what ChatGPT could provide, and it was good.
Was that
It was
did you
decent.
pray to your patron saint or your AI and your demon
We
or your
should've.
angel in cyberspace for the answer?
We
Well, my
should have,
point is,
yeah.
you kind of did, right? You actually, I asked 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, I asked God to guide me. In fantasy novels, God becomes gods.
Mhm.
I asked the God of my podcast to guide me, and this is what they said.
Mhm.
Right. And so where does fantasy, where does science end? I think it is extraordinary inspirational because it opens up your mind, right? It's like, what happens if I dematerialize every book that's ever been written and I can put it on an iPad? Okay, well, I just gave 100 million books to 8 billion people for a nickel. Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's not linear thinking. But that's like second order thinking. Third order thinking is, okay, let's just dematerialize every book and then let's read every book and let's give you, the equivalent of a professor that's read every book, and you can ask the professor anything. And the first order is, hey, can you just give me enough money to print a bunch of books and give you a big library? But, printing the books is fiendishly expensive for the civilization. Making you read them is double fiendishly expensive. So what if the computer printed them, the computer read them? And, at some point, the fourth order is, hey, why don't you just read every book, look over my shoulder, think about what I ought to do, and just do it.
Yeah. You're
Okay.
placing a lot of trust, though, in the AI. Do you worry about that? And people not having the self-sufficiency to be able to maybe see through some of that might not apply to them, or rely too heavily?
Oh, yeah. Well, look, we're all going to worry about a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
right? When you get on an airplane, you get in a tube and you fly 6,000
Oh gosh, don't
miles.
go on Earth. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you know
no,
that if
this
the
is
window
not-
blows open, you'll freeze
All
to
right,
death or
this-
you'll suffocate, before anybody can do anything about it. But meanwhile, on you probably don't think about it. You want me to make you worry? Because I'm an aeronautical engineer. On approach, right? If the pilot takes his eye off, off the approach and gets unstable for 2 seconds, the plane may go into a tailspin. You're going to crash and burn. And there's not a single thing you can do about it. And does it ever occur to you to worry about what the pilot
All the
drank
time.
the night before he got into the plane?
See, what I'm concerned about is if you have a mentally unstable pilot that wants to do a lot of harm to a lot of people. That's what I'm concerned about.
I get
But we
so
can
antsy on
speculate all we
takeoff,
want.
yeah.
Graham and I are horrified of flying as it is. Like, I look over at
I was
him
fine
and
for a while, but
Really?
yeah, I was fine
Okay,
up
but
until
let me F
yeah.
with you a bit more, which is, okay, are we going to worry about AI bots driving your car? And are you worried about someone taking over the car and crashing the AI driven car? Or next time you go into New York City or wherever you go and you call an Uber, does it occur to you that no matter how well you eat, how well you drink, how well you live your life, how careful you are, how good a shape you're in, that the random person that picked you up in the Uber in 2 seconds can drive you off the bridge and kill you with no chance to appeal, right? your life is basically in the hands of a random driver every time you get in a taxi cab. And you ought to be a lot more afraid of that than getting on the airplane, because at least with the airplane, there's two pilots. And by the way, it's against professional rules, and he will get fired, or she will get fired if they drink, and there's another person to look at them and assess whether they're
That's good to
sober when they
know.
walk on
Yeah.
the airplane. And if they lose it or sneeze or have a seizure, there's another person to land the plane. Now I'm going to put you back in the random Uber in a foreign country that's swerving in traffic. And okay, if you think, oh, I'm too smart because I breathalyze test and I personality test the Uber driver when I get in the car. Maybe you think that. Has it occurred to you that the guy on the other side of the median strip can just take a drug, drink a thing, and do this? Bam.
But I think
And you're
about that
gone.
from time to time as I'm driving, because you hear just random stories of exactly that, of just a car that just made the wrong turn and just hits somebody who was in their lane doing exactly as they should, driving the speed.
And there's a point to all this,
Yeah.
which is people used to die falling off their horse a lot. You just don't read about it because we didn't take good records. And if you roll the clock back to 1950, without technology, the average life expectancy was 50. If you roll the clock back to 1770, the average life expectancy was 32. People actually walked past a swamp, got bit by a mosquito, and died of malaria or some fever, or they lived in a house that didn't have heat and they died of pneumonia. And people are dying of all sorts of things before we had technology. Now, we live in the early 21st century, and there's a million things for you to worry about. But if we unleash AI and the robots drive the cars and they fly the airplanes, it's more likely than not the case that the average number of traffic deaths fall in the same way that in the modern era of antibiotics and hospitals and modern dentistry, you live an extra 30 years, even though you're taking some kind of risk when you do it. Yeah, we can worry about it all. There'll be a debate. There's going to be politicians that'll say you're safer in a car driven by a person than in a car driven by a computer. That probably won't be the case, but people will believe it's the case. And that's above our pay grade, right? It's going to be determined, regardless of what you think about it, with high likelihood.
But before we get into that, something you guys may not know about me is that I actually studied Spanish for 6 years. And last year I actually went to Mexico and realized I could probably use a little bit of practice on my Spanish. And what better way to do that than with our sponsor, Babbel?
For those unaware, Babbel is the language learning platform that's helping millions of people quickly and confidently have real-world conversations in a brand new language.
Their super fast 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by expert linguists to help you learn a whole new language in as little as 3 weeks.
Whether it's German, Spanish, Polish, Portuguese, or anything in between, Babbel provides you with practical tips and tools that are approachable, accessible, and rooted in real-life situations to ensure that you're ready to apply whatever you've learned in real-world scenarios.
Babbel's courses have really just helped me refresh and improve on my Spanish skills. It makes it a lot easier when I'm trying to either order something in Spanish, get directions, or just make conversation. And a big piece of this confidence comes from Babbel's speech recognition technology, which helps you refine your pronunciation and your accent.
Adios.
So don't pay hundreds of dollars to a private tutor or waste hours on an app that doesn't really help you learn the language.
Y por tiempo limitado, tenemos una oferta especial, which means for a limited time, we have a very special deal for our listeners. You can get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/ICH.
Again, you could get up to 60% off at babbel.com/ICH. That's spelled BABBEL.com/ICH. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Thank you so much, Babbel, for sponsoring this episode, and back to the podcast. You mentioned on Lex Friedman that if you look at civilization, half of the problems are due to the fact that our understanding of money and economics is defective. What do you mean by that? And what is the common and incorrect perspective versus the uncommon and correct perspective?
The common perspective is to think that money is the currency that the government gives you, and that the economic policies of the government are for the good, are for your own good, and you'll benefit by complying with them or accepting them. And that most conventional economic principles and conventional economic education is useful, or that conventional economic figures are valid. Economics, as we enter the 21st century, really is a pseudoscience. And I would argue that before Bitcoin, all economics was an art. It was somewhere between art, pseudoscience, and religion and philosophy, uh, and political science. And it wasn't a scientific discipline or an engineering discipline. I'm not even sure the economists would disagree over that, by the way. So we lived in a world where human race never had perfected money. We never engineered money. And in the absence of perfected money, you can't have economics as an engineering discipline. And that means that all of the political policies and political economic wisdom generally is subject to debate, and there is no right and wrong. So people capriciously do what they want to do, and they generate facts and metrics to support whatever they want to do. It's kind of a religious pseudoscience, and it's not rigorous engineering. It's not anchored in mathematics, scientific discipline, and you can't characterize it as an engineering discipline. Now, let me go back to the question of what is money. Fundamentally, people think currency is money, but really, the academic definition of what is money is medium of exchange, a unit of account, a store of value. What is it really? Well, money is just the most tradable good, the most durable tradable element or unit of something that we can trade for something else of value. So in the history of the world, you go back 10,000 years, people might have traded seashells, or they traded stone coins or polished glass beads, or they might have traded arrowheads. What is the universal commodity that we know people will accept? And we use it to create a market economy, to solve the problem of coincidence of wants, right? Everybody produces something different. And if you have stone axes and I have food, and I want the stone axe and you want the food, we trade for some ratio. But if everybody doesn't have exactly what everybody else